All right. Well, let me just check. Am I missing anything? Okay. I did want to talk a little bit about late breeding species. So there are still things that are breeding, even though we have shorebirds migrating already and people are getting pumped about all the Dunlin showing up and everything. There is still stuff that's breeding as well. Like it's only July and we still have, a whole nother month of summer. So I mean, it's definitely slowed down, but it's there is still stuff to see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those species and give you some idea of what to be on the lookout for. So, Jared, you see my presentation?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect.
Although it's still in the, okay, there you go.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I tried to, for this presentation, pick some photos of birds that were documented breeding in July and August. So, so you can get a feel for some of the species to be on the lookout for. These are some pied-billed grebes from late August last year. So, and this is still a really young pied-billed grebe still has all the stripes on the head and everything. So that's one species that you might keep an eye out for. So the overall point of tonight's talk is that there is still time to see some really cool breeding behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit more about goldfinch in a second, but they are one of the species that breeds late in the summer. They never, I should not say never say never with birds. They will always surprise you and do something unusual. But they almost always wait until July or August to start breeding. So yeah, so let's talk about some of these species. And I can explain why goldfinches wait until later in the summer. So, so some of our late nesting species, they have this strategy where they are taking advantage of some resource in the environment. So they are kind of what we would call opportunistic. They're taking advantage of the best opportunity in the season to breed. So you have waxwings, that's another one. They tend to start a little bit earlier than goldfinches, but they are waiting until the fruits have developed on the plants that, for all those berries to ripen so that they have food to feed their young. So they're waiting. Usually you'll see big flocks of them up until end of June, early July. Then they start to pair off. And by now they're paired off and already are on nests and have, some of them have young and are feeding young. So that's one of our later species. Let me do one thing here. Nope. Where are my controls? We'll do that. Okay, and then goldfinch is one, they wait a little bit longer even because they're waiting not just for things to fruit, but for them to actually go to seed, because they're feeding seed to their young. So they're waiting often until July or even August to start breeding. So they have just started in most places around the state. They're just getting on their nests, and I know some of them have young already, some are still building nests. So they're kind of in that early stages. Crossbills, that's one. They have two distinct breeding periods in New York, in this part of the country. They will breed in the late winter, so like in February and March, when you have a lot of these cones that have ripened and they're easy for them to get into. And then they will breed again this time of year, late summer, when the cones have developed from this summer and there's plenty of seeds available for them to feed as well. So crossbills are also one to be keeping an eye out for. And I've been hearing reds. A lot of places I've been going west of Albany, up in the Adirondacks. I've been down in the Catskills. I've been hearing red crossbills around, and I know one of our technicians just heard a white-winged crossbill. So there are a few around, not like they have been in the past couple of years when we've had tons of them, but they are still around. So it's one to pay attention to. And then both of the cuckoos, and these are extremely opportunistic breeders. They don't always breed in New York every summer in large numbers. There's usually a few, but sometimes we get huge numbers. Sometimes we just have a scattering. They're waiting for insect outbreaks. My impression this summer is that the yellow-billed cuckoos were more numerous, and they have already started breeding. And they're waiting for, things like tent caterpillars and the spongy moths and things like that to have outbreaks. And that's what they're using to feed their young. And interestingly enough, this is another cool fact about cuckoos. I love cuckoos have some really weird adaptations that they have. But one really cool thing is they are the fastest breeding species in North America. So they will go from laying an egg to fledging their young within about 2 weeks. It's like the young just develop so quickly because they're flying around looking for these food sources, and as soon as they find one, they land, they breed, and they take advantage of those insects right away. So they're going extremely fast, which is just really cool, I think. So these are the species that are breeding late and don't really breed. Well, I can't really say that. Okay, that they're breeding. Sorry, I'm thinking about the crossbills. I was going to say they only breed late in the summer, but that's not quite true because cuckoos will vary and crossbills can breed early too. So, but these are ones that you can expect to be breeding in July and August around here. Okay, so then that's one approach to late nesting species. Then there are species that have multiple broods. So these are species that are raising, they lay a nest, they have a bunch of eggs, they raise those young to fledgling, and then they start over again and they do it again, all within the same summer. So that's what a multiple brood species is. And there's advantages and disadvantages to doing that. If they can get in another brood successfully, that increases their chance of survival and passing on their genes to the next generation, right? So that's the main reason why they're doing it. But then it's extremely costly energetically, right? So not every bird has the energy reserves or the fitness in order to be able to do that. So there's a lot of pros and cons to doing that. So I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between a renesting attempt and a multiple brooder. So a renesting attempt is when something fails. So either the nest is destroyed, the eggs are predated on, or even the young nestlings are predated on. If that happens early enough in the season, for some species, then they will try to raise, they'll try to nest again and raise at least one successful brood. So that's what we call a replacement or a renest attempt. Okay, and then there's the actual multiple brooders that are carrying out these 2 or more successful broods to completion. And with that, we have 2 different strategies that birds are using here in New York. And the first one is really these sequential broods. So they'll have a nest, they raise the young, those young fledge, and then they start again from scratch and they do it over again. Okay. That takes a little bit longer time because they need to go from egg to fledgling and then egg to fledgling. The other approach is to overlap those broods. And so some species like cardinals and rose-breasted grosbeaks will overlap the broods. So they'll lay their eggs, the female gets them till they hatch and helps raise them until they fledge. And then the male takes over and will feed those fledglings while the female goes and lays another nest and will sit on those eggs and work on that second batch. So they overlap. So that way they can get more broods in over the summer. So there's two different approaches there. Okay, so that's the difference between a renest and multiple brooding. And there's a number of different influences for, that will impact whether or not a species can actually carry out more than one brood. Some of it is just physiology, that some birds just can't physically manage the energetic costs of having multiple broods. Some of it is habitat quality. If they're in marginal habitat, there's not going to be enough food available or enough nesting places for them to try again. And then there's also, how long the breeding season is. A lot of our Arctic breeders, so those shorebirds, it feels like they just barely went north and now they're already coming back. And it's because the summer breeding season up north is so short that they can only really try once. And if they fail, then they're done. They can't try again. Here we have longer season, so birds can have 2 or 3 broods. So that's another factor. And then also the timing of the first clutch will have an impact. So if you're a resident bird who's here year round, you can get started breeding a lot earlier in the season. So then you can actually have enough time to raise another brood. Whereas if you're a neotropical migrant, you're going to arrive and you're not going to get here and start nesting until June, right? Late May, early June. Then you have a little bit less time in order to carry out multiple broods. So there's some of the bigger influences that we have on multiple broods. And then it's also important to note that those later broods, the multiple broods, they often tend to be smaller. The fledglings don't weigh as much, and they have less time to get really big and strong before the winter, before they migrate, before they try to deal with cold weather and things like that. So, so there is that con as well. So there's a lot of things that these birds are weighing, but they're really just trying to maximize their output every year because they have really short lifespans. So they're trying to breed as much as possible. So some of the species that we have here in New York that breed 2 or 3 times a year. So this is these are our super breeders that are just breeding for months and months at a time. And these are really the commonest species that you think of in New York. Like I mentioned, the cardinal, you've got robins, right? They start as soon as they arrive and they just breed and breed and breed. You've got wrens and some of the pigeons and mourning doves. They'll start really early. So we have a lot of those species. House sparrows, that's another one. And then we have other species that it varies quite a bit. Sometimes they'll have 1 brood, sometimes they'll have 2 or 3 broods, just depending on all of those factors that we've discussed. And so these are still pretty common species, but they tend to be ones that are a little that are more migratory. They move around a bit more. Yeah, so these are things like, our grackles and redwings. Some of the species that I tend to look for late in the year are these, there's a couple on here on this list. So song sparrow, juncos, and black-throated blues, believe it or not. So black-throated blues are mostly migrating to the Caribbean, so they're a short distant migrant. So they have a little more time. They don't have to travel as far, but they're still making babies all through the summer. So you'll still get them feeding young and being agitated even in August. So there are still some of these species. All right, and then we have these super cool birds. I think these are really cool species that we're still trying to figure out exactly what these birds are doing, but I'm presenting to you what we currently believe is happening for these two species. And there are other species as well that are thought to do this behavior. So these are migratory double breeders. So these are birds that are breeding in one place, completely different from here, and then they're flying again, and they're breeding somewhere else completely different. So it's like, I think it's super cool. Like, of course you should do that. Then you can follow the seasons. Like if you're like down south, you can like breed in the southern US earlier in the, in like February, March, and then you can come up here and breed in June, and it's like you get more attempts in. So we had sedge wrens and dickcissels. So they are both species that will attempt to breed somewhere else. And then later in the summer, we tend to see them showing up here a bit more. And we're kind of on the fringes of where they will attempt to breed, but they're moving in from the Midwest and trying it again. So that's really, I think, super cool behavior. All right, and then this, actually, I think Jennifer's on here tonight. So I had seen Jennifer posted on the Facebook page that she was out at Nickerson Beach this weekend and had lots of baby birds, and so I decided to use one of her photos to feature. And so you can see skimmer is one of those that they will attempt to renest like 3 times. So a lot of birds, if they fail, they'll just try to renest once. But skimmers are some that if they fail, they'll try and try and try again. And so you can still end up with these really young skimmers really late in the season. I think I've seen other records going even into September for these skimmers. So anyway, so that just wanted to have another example that the summer and the breeding season is still not quite over yet. There's still stuff to do. I will say that it was extremely quiet this past weekend in the Adirondacks in the forest. So I think we still had, like fledgling barred owl and, kinglets and creepers and what else did we have? Some of the vireos, blue-headed vireo and things like that. So we still were able to confirm a few species, but it was like a lot harder than it is earlier in the year. And I generally this time of year, you might have noticed a lot of those species that are on those list there are species that are breeding in more like edge habitat or shrubby habitat or open habitats. So those those habitats tend to be a little bit more productive at this time of year. So, all right, that is all I had prepared.
Can I throw one out too, Julie?
Yeah.
The rallids, don't forget the rails. They will renest and double brood, clapper rails in particular for the coastal folks, but even
Nice.
Virginia rails and soras will try again.
And I am also putting in the chat the page that I have, the guide that I put together on the website too. So if you want to like be able to see that list of species, that's there as well. Yeah, and let's see, speaking of the rails, there is also, what do I have linked there? Okay. From the second atlas, the last atlas, they put together a whole table of for all the species that breed in New York, and listed out how many broods they have, and it also has like early and late nesting dates for all those species. So I just put a link in the chat too for our the main webpage that we have on our website that has all of these reference materials that we put together. So if you look in there for the breeding season table from Atlas 2000, that's what you're looking for here. I'll copy the actual link to that PDF too. So there's that direct link to the PDF. And that will list all of the species that have multiple broods. I kind of handpicked some of the more common ones that you encounter and put those in the presentation. But there's definitely a lot more species that will have more nests. Yeah, some of the Vireos, Dan, they have multiple nests, so that's great. And somebody said, something about, Jennifer said, the waxwings have fletched on Long Island. Oh, yeah, right. The mulberries. Oh my God. Birds love mulberries. Yeah, exactly. You guys are further ahead phenologically than we are down on Long Island. So you guys have things are shifted a little bit earlier down there for some species. And then further north you go, things are a little later, but yeah. So I kind of flew through that fairly quickly. But if people have questions about that or about what you've been seeing or other technological issues, I'll be happy to try to answer those questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and just speak. Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
I was actually struck by your first picture of the pied-billed grebe feeding young. I mostly think that precocial birds don't feed their young. And like mergansers, there are 4 on the acceptable breeding code for feeding young. What is it about pied-billed grebes where they feed their young, and with what principle is going on in general there?
I think it's the same as like common loons also will feed their young. So you have some of these birds that they're primarily eating food that you have to dive for. And the young birds have too much downy feathers. They can't really dive down far enough yet, and they're not really skilled enough to like capture prey. Whereas some of like the dabbling ducks, for example, are going for vegetation that's on the surface or just under the surface. And so for those, the adults can just kind of bring the young to the food and then they'll eat it themselves. So yeah, it's mostly like what they're eating.
But mergansers dive for fish. And if you look at the acceptable breeding codes chart, there are 4 for feeding young. So I was wondering what's the difference there?
With mergansers.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jared, do you know?
Yeah, so, and this is true for pied-billed grebes too, but it's more common. Young ducks and ducklings and dabbling ducks do this too, and not just divers, but they'll eat insects and things on the surface as well. So when they're small enough, they eat a lot of invertebrates. So even dabbling ducks will eat a lot of invertebrates and not just vegetation. So it really comes down to the food availability, like Julie was saying, in terms of what they will eat. Like oyster catchers are another one that come to my mind a lot of the time because they can't pry anything open with their they don't have their nice big old bill yet. So they're another one where it's kind of a weird precocial where the parents will feed the young. They'll still feed themselves if something good is out there in front of them, but you know, there's not enough of it around. They need an extra hand. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan. Yeah, waxwings are so cool. They're little kleptos. They steal nesting material. I think it's great. It's like, why not? You know, you have a robin that's already finished nesting. Why not use that extra material? It's much easier to collect. So yeah, waxwings are known to do that quite a bit. They'll steal nest material from other birds. And then what's this? Nest box swapping between broods, between species. Oh, so like a swallow will use a bluebird box, for example, is I think what you're saying. Most species, I'll say a lot of species will move to another nest site. Bluebird to swallow to house rent. Nice. A lot of that is, and I see your hand, John, just a sec. Has to do with the like parasites that are in those nest boxes and in nests. So a lot of birds don't use their same nest again right away because there's so many parasites have built up in that nest that they want to move somewhere else. And then, yeah, John, you had a question.
No, in respect to the swapping, my brother down in Tennessee they put up the boxes for the bluebirds. They had 2 boxes. The bluebirds used 1 box when they left. Titmice moved in. Wrens used the other one, but then bluebirds are back in that box after the wrens left. So they are switching out, like when they're different broods, they're just going back to the same spot. So it happens, you know. So instance of it happening.
Musical chairs, kind of, just with nests. And Charlie, you had chickadees and then house friends. Nice.
I had tree swallows and then house wrens at my house. They're doing their second brood. The house wrens are on their second brood, 10 feet away from their first one right now.
That is really interesting, Kay Conway, about the mourning dove sitting on the robin eggs. That's really bizarre. I've never heard of that, really. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Everybody looked very confused that day.
Yes, it sounds like that would be. I will say, I think it was maybe 2 summers ago. I had not quite the same thing, but we had a mourning dove that just hung out on one of our bird feeders like for a long time, and then it laid an egg on the bird feeder, and then the egg just sat there all day, and even like grackles and blackbirds and stuff were coming in, and nobody would touch the egg because it was like not supposed to be there. It's really funny. But yeah, I don't know what's up with these mourning doves. They get a little confused, it sounds like.
They get broody like chickens, I think, sometimes.
And Jean, yeah, I think chipping sparrows are one that does multiple brood. But we can double check that.
The latest eggs on that chart from the last atlas are 726. So given that was
That's today.
20 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, it says 1 to 2 broods on that chart that we sent out.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, you're welcome. And they're like, you know, one of these species that does arrive early on the early side and stays kind of late, so they have a longer period of time to fit in another brood. Merlin and Saratoga. I don't think Merlin are multiple brooders, but I'm just checking while I speak. But a lot of the raptors, so the falcons, the hawks, and those species are, they take a really long time for the young to develop. Yeah, that just, the chart just says one, although it's kind of a new breeder in New York, so we don't have complete data. But yeah, a lot of those raptors take a lot longer to develop. So you'll see the young till much later into the season. And I've been hearing a lot of broadwings lately, and I think they're another one. They arrive fairly late because they're eating primarily reptiles like snakes and stuff. So they don't come until later, and then I think they're on their eggs for close to a month, and then they're like takes at least a month until they fledge. So you've got like a 2-month period where they're like at the nest. So that's the same for a lot of the, owls and hawks and falcons.
This is just excuse me, just an
Mhm.
incidental. I've had the great honor of having great horned owls just right here in my neighborhood. The youngsters are making all strange noise that they make. And I actually heard the pair vocalizing late January. So it's just a real treat.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love watching them from beginning to end. It's just really cool to see all the different stages for like one pair. It's really nice. You're lucky. We hear them like in the winter. We hear them in our neighborhood, but then we haven't found the nest. I presume it's on private property where I can't get to. And so I miss out every year. Like we hear them duetting and duetting and duetting, and then we don't get any babies. This is kind of disappointing.
I have a number of recordings of the babies, and I've just got to learn how to post them on eBird,
Yeah, that's one of our next topics for the town halls. So and I can post a link for you right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully these links all still work. I put this together. When did I put this together? Maybe 2 years ago. And what I did was I pulled all of the different help files on Macaulay Library and also the eBird web help pages, and I put them all into one place where it walked you through all the steps for how to load audio recordings and photos and all of that kind of information, what to add like for like notes, comments too, things like that. So hopefully that will help you. But let me know, Becky, if you go through that and there some links are broken, let me know and I'll update it. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I have a question about the red crossbills. It's not a bird that I know a lot about. And I use hearing aids, and I heard this loud bird. This is in New York, in the foothills of the Adirondacks. And then I saw online that these were starting to move in this way, perhaps. Red crossbill, and Merlin said it was a red crossbill. I couldn't see the bird, but I did note that the pine trees are just loaded with fresh green cones. Do the red crossbills feed on them at that point, or at this point, or?
Yes.
So it would make sense that they're actively nesting now.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, what they're doing is they're flying around until they find a nice patch of forest that has tons of cones. And then once they see that, they'll be like, oh, okay, great. There's enough food here. I could raise young. Let's settle down and nest.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if the cone had to mature first, but I really noticeably loaded in that area.
Oh,
All
awesome.
the large pines are just about as laden as they ever get with cones, white pines, that is.
Yeah,
Oh, thanks.
yeah, and I'll send you, I'm gonna put another link in the chat.
I did make a recording and I'm gonna on Merlin, and I don't know yet how to share that, but I would like to get another opinion about the calls.
Okay, yeah, so two things then. One, use that link that I sent before about how to document your sightings. And then I just put in another link for red crossbills. We have featured red and white winged crossbills a couple of times, both with presentations and field trips, and also doing these detailed species accounts as well. So I just put the link to the species account in there. But then once you're able to load that recording onto your checklist, you can send your checklist to Matt Young at the
Yeah.
Finch Network, and he can ID it to, well, he'll verify that it's a red crossbill, and then he'll help verify the type, the call type that it is as well.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
So yeah. More questions or observations?
I was just gonna throw out, Julie, with how cool the cuckoos are. Part of the reason that they are likely so fast is, even though they're not European cuckoos, they are opportunistic nest parasites. So they will on occasion parasitize, like lay their eggs in other birds' nests. So just like brown cowbirds hatch super fast and European cuckoos hatch out and get big super fast, our cuckoos do it on occasion too, usually to each other and not
Right,
to
yeah, usually to the same species.
usually to the same species, but yes, they
Yeah.
they will drop some eggs in a neighbor's nest from time to time.
It's a great question, Kim. Do we expect a lot of impact to warblers breeding in Canada? And I'm presuming, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm presuming you're referring to wildfire smoke. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. And I've been asked this a couple of times and I don't have a good answer. I don't know, Jared, if you know, but my understanding is that we don't have a great understanding of the impact of wildfire smoke on wild birds. However, we can presume that because they're relatively small bodies, they're breathing in, their whole airway system is quite different than ours. They're constantly intaking air, and they're using all of these air sacs to breathe. And you're talking about very fine particulate matters. Most likely it is taxing on them physically in order to be able to breathe well. But I don't know how that affects their ability to breed successfully, or I don't know very much. Do you know more, Jared? No.
No, I think there's a threshold, and it's going to depend on the size of the bird and how close they are to the fire. I don't think our birds here in New York are going to be adversely affected by the smoke, but up there, I haven't seen any good work that really looks at anything other than the habitat being destroyed in the middle of their breeding season.
Right. Yeah, and what I read recently too was that it's just so hard to design a study around wildfires because they're so unpredictable. And so like to get like a grad student to do a study on wildfire smoke impacts on birds, it's like very hit or miss and you can't really plan. So it hasn't been done much, but I presume it will be more in the future as we have more regular wildfire seasons. So yeah, John.
I just say we just have to be a little more diligent in our observations on the fall migration to see what's passing through, and that'll give us a better idea of what happened up north as they pass by.
Yeah, if we can see how many juveniles come down. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Any more questions or observations too? I'm always curious to see what people are seeing in different parts of the state, since I tend to spend most of my time around Albany. So it's good for me to get a bigger idea of what's happening. So
Then I'm gonna say on the eastern Queens, like a western Nassau border, besides the monk parrots that are feeding their young, I have grackles feeding the fledglings, sparrows, the house sparrows are back to, with the fledglings. And another spot I found a pair of fledglings with their parent flicker. And they were just starting to feed on their own, but one of them was still kept looking at its parent and basically going, well, give me one of them. So it's like, so it's like they were just about ready, I think, to start like feeding completely on their own, but they were still getting fed a couple of times after a couple of pecks, and then reach over to the parent and say, "Go, give me some."
yeah,
So
easier to beg than to forage on your own.
Yeah, we're also Nassau County. Most of our breeding warblers have already packed it in. I mean, one area where we know you've got about 8 pairs of yellow warblers, they're gone.
Yellow warblers are one of they're pretty fast. Like they
Yep.
come in mass and then they leave. They're one of the earliest
Yeah.
warblers to leave. So
And
That
the
doesn't
red
surprise
starts
me.
also are disappearing.
yes, that's a good point. I did not see any red starts this weekend in the
Yeah.
Adirondacks. Yeah. Yeah.
I put a link in also. There was an article on the Audubon website about wildfire impact.
Oh, great. And it looks like somebody else posted about posting,
Let me do
uploading
that.
data too.
I did it as a private message by mistake. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just
Let me
gonna say,
try
I
that
don't
again.
see it. There we go. Perfect. I think this might be the article that I read recently. And this was like the only thing that I could find on it. So
Yeah. There's I actually was just researching this because I was writing an article about it, and you have to look at Canada. There's a couple of researchers out in BC, and there's some people in California. The West Coast people have a lot more experience that are looking at impacts of wildfires.
yeah, they have a much more regular fire season. So
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. All right, I had another question about feeding suet now to young birds, and whether that's helpful or whether or not that prevents the young from learning how to forage on their own. I think people are kind of vary on this, but oops, hang on. Yeah, okay. I think there's a lot of varying advice out there about even just whether or not you should feed birds in the summertime. And that I think is, I have no problems with feeding birds in the summertime as long as you don't have bears in the neighborhood. If you have bears, then you can get fined for that from DEC. But in terms of feeding suet, I've not heard of any studies showing that the young are less able to find food for themselves if they're learning how to feed from feeders. I don't know if anyone else has seen any other studies, but I haven't seen any studies that say that it's a bad thing to feed birds in the summer.
I just say that the birds that eat the suet that I put out, periodically during the late spring into the early summer, are the same birds that'll be feeding off of anything that drops on the ground, from people dropping their lunch or their breakfast foods on the ground. So for that, it's just more or less it's the same type of stuff. The same birds that'll be pulling garbage out of a pail are eating the suet. So it's the starlings, the grackles, the house sparrows. The only thing that maybe goes to the suet that's not is occasionally the woodpeckers will come in for it, but even they don't really come in for it that much. So it's basically starlings, grackles, and house sparrows, and the catbird, and the catbird.
Interesting. I get tons of woodpeckers at my suet. I get all of them coming in, the young ones, the old ones. Yeah, probably just varies on where you are in the state.
Yeah, down here, the grackles are the suet kings.
Interesting.
Yeah, my yard
That's
became
funny.
a teenage hangout for the grackles.
Yep, same here. Yeah, it's like they take them like it's a teenage daycare center, it's like, here
Oh
you
my
are, kids.
goodness.
There's food, there's water.
Go for
See ya.
it. Leave me alone. I need a break. Someone asked, what do hummingbirds feed their young? When they're young, their nestlings, they'll feed them insects. They do feed insects. So yeah, they'll you can sometimes see them carrying little insects in their bill when they're flying around. Yeah, Charlie.
I have another question about feeding young. This is for birds that feed by regurgitation. And the thing that I'm particularly interested in is like mourning doves and goldfinches. Mourning doves, I think, are a 3 in the acceptable breeding codes for feeding young. Goldfinches are a 1, or maybe it's the other way around. What's the difference there?
I haven't looked at, I don't have the numbers memorized from that chart.
You don't? Why not?
I know, right? I should. I think it's so some of, that's based on like other Alice projects as well, and like just how common it is for people to see, like to observe the behavior. So not necessarily whether it's done or not.
Yeah,
if that makes
goldfinch is a
sense.
1.
Okay.
And modos are a 3.
Yeah.
It may be because goldfinches will still feed things other than seeds sometimes. So
Yeah, it could be. Whereas modos are only really regurgitating the milk and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, I don't think I have ever seen a mourning dove feeding young.
Yeah. When I was reviewing some checklists, that's what I was encountering. And so that's why I started to wonder about it.
Interesting.
So there's a difference between a bird with a crop and without a crop. Would make
Yeah.
a difference to him more than anything.
Well, they both have crops, but
They both do okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And the doves have the milk. It's not really milk, but I don't even know what it is. It's ground up stuff.
It's like
Yeah.
liquid oatmeal. It's like oatmeal.
Yeah, there you go. It's like oatmeal. I feel like mourning doves, like I've only a couple times seen their nests. They're one of these birds that like just suddenly the young appear out of nowhere. It's like you're just like, wait, where did you come from?
It doesn't take them much to build a nest. They got to get 3 or 4 sticks up on top of an air conditioner and they got a nest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you can like see right through them, and you're like, how? That's not really a nest. Yeah. Any other questions? It's already 8 o'clock, so I just want to see if there's any last minute questions, and then maybe we'll hang up for the night.
Sounds good.
No last minute questions. It looks like everyone's ready to go. Everyone needs to cool off. I have my fan right here. So I'm like, all right. Well, thanks everyone. Hopefully some of that was helpful. It's really nice to touch base with you all and see your friendly faces. So thanks for coming. All right. Have a good night. Happy